Rain had a way of making Boston feel lonelier than it actually was. It blurred the city lights into pale streaks of silver and gold and wrapped the narrow streets in a quiet that sounded almost like grief. Evelyn Brooks had always loved Rain once. Before betrayal. Before whispered apologies that meant nothing. Before she learned that danger didn't always arrive wearing the face of a stranger. Now at 27, Rain only reminded her to double-check the locks. Evelyn stood near the window of her tiny apartment in Beacon Hill, watching droplets race down the glass while the warmth from her untouched coffee disappeared into the cold air. The apartment wasn't much. One bedroom. A cramped kitchen. A faded couch pushed against the wall beneath a bookshelf packed with forensic accounting manuals and crime reports. It wasn't beautiful, but it was controlled. Safe. At least that was the illusion she had carefully built. She checked the deadbolt for the third time that evening. Then the chain lock. Then the small security camera feed connected to her phone. Only after completing the routine did her shoulders lower by a fraction. 8 months earlier, Evelyn Brooks had disappeared from her own life. To her colleagues at the Financial Crimes Division in downtown Boston, she remained exactly who she had always been. Intelligent, composed, meticulous. The woman capable of untangling fraudulent empires hidden beneath layers of deception. The investigator whose reports dismantled million-dollar schemes with clinical precision. No one saw the emotionally scarred woman beneath the tailored blazers. No one noticed how her gaze instinctively searched for exits in crowded rooms. How her breath shortened whenever footsteps echoed too closely behind her. How compliments made her uncomfortable because affection had once been weaponized against her. Her former fiancé had taught her devastating lessons. Love could become control. Promises could become prisons. Whispers could become threats. She had escaped before the wedding. Changed her phone number. Moved apartments. Severed friendships that connected her to her old world. She rebuilt herself using rules instead of trust. Control became survival. Vulnerability became danger. And fear became familiar enough to feel safe. Outside, thunder rolled over Boston Harbor. Inside, Evelyn sat at the kitchen counter beneath harsh yellow light, reviewing forensic statements for a corporate embezzlement case. Numbers soothed her. Evidence obeyed logic. Financial trails led somewhere tangible. People did not. Her heart pounded unexpectedly when distant laughter drifted through the apartment walls. She hated that simple sound startled her. She hated even more that healing felt impossible. She wasn't weak. She wasn't broken. She was not a victim. She was simply surviving. Hours passed. Empty coffee mugs gathered beside scattered documents while midnight settled over the city like an unwelcome visitor. Eventually, exhaustion forced Evelyn towards sleep. She completed her nightly ritual. Checked windows. Checked cameras. Checked locks. Set alarms. Then crawled beneath neatly folded blankets. Her breathing slowed. 3 hours later, she awoke instantly. No scream. No nightmare. Only instinct. Silence filled the apartment. Too much silence. Heart pounding against her ribs, Evelyn sat upright and listened. Close. Breath steady. Control. Nothing moved. Yet unease settled heavily inside her chest. Morning arrived beneath steel-gray skies. The rain never stopped. Dressed in charcoal slacks and a cream blouse, Evelyn prepared for another ordinary day pretending she wasn't haunted by invisible wars. She opened her apartment door. And froze. An envelope rested neatly on the welcome mat. No stamp. No address. No explanation. Fear tightened around her lungs. Slowly, carefully she picked it up and carried it inside. She locked the door. Then the chain. Then stood motionless beneath fluorescent kitchen lighting. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Controlled movements. Measured breathing. Steady hands. Inside were photographs. The first captured her leaving work. The second showed her buying groceries. The third showed her reading alone in a coffee shop. Each image was taken from impossible angles. Someone had been close enough to observe her routines. Close enough to know her habits. Close enough to study her. The final photograph slipped into her trembling fingers. Evelyn's breath stopped. Her heart pounded so violently she could hear it. The image showed her standing outside her apartment building beneath falling rain. She remembered that evening. Remembered being alone. But she hadn't been. Standing directly behind her was a tall man dressed in black. Watching. Silent. Close enough to whisper against her ear. Close enough to reach for her shoulder. Close enough to destroy the illusion of safety she had fought so desperately to build. And the most terrifying part wasn't that someone had found her. It was the realization that he had been standing there all along. And she had never seen him. Fear had a way of changing shape. Sometimes it arrived as a memory that stole sleep from the middle of the night. Sometimes it hid behind familiar smiles and promises that sounded like forever. And sometimes, fear wore an expensive charcoal suit and waited patiently in the back seat of a black luxury sedan parked outside your apartment building. Evelyn Brooks stood frozen beneath Boston's relentless rain, clutching the photographs against her chest while questions collided inside her mind. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to run, to disappear again, to find another city, another apartment, another carefully constructed life built on locked doors and controlled routines. But survival had taught her another truth. You couldn't outrun danger that already knew your name. The sleek sedan waiting across the street had been there for nearly 20 minutes. Heart pounding beneath her ribs, Evelyn tightened her grip on her umbrella and made the decision to walk in the opposite direction. Her breath remained measured while her pulse betrayed her composure. She moved through crowded sidewalks near Boston Harbor, convincing herself that blending into the morning rush could still protect her. It didn't. Miss Brooks. The voice came from beside her. Oh, controlled. Close enough to make her entire body tense. She turned sharply. The man standing there looked less like a threat and more like the polished face of old money success. Immaculate navy suit. Silver tie. Expression unreadable beneath cold professionalism. We need you to come with us. Fear tightened around her lungs. No. The answer left instantly. Firm. Controlled. The stranger neither argued nor stepped closer. Mr. Moretti anticipated that response, he said quietly. However, this isn't a request born from power. It's survival. The name meant nothing. Yet the certainty in his voice unsettled her. Adrian Moretti. Within the hour, Evelyn found herself inside a private elevator ascending toward the highest floors overlooking Boston Harbor. She hated herself for agreeing. Hated that fear had overridden logic. But the photographs resting inside her purse whispered a terrifying reality. Someone had been watching. Someone had found her. The elevator doors opened into another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked storm-covered water where gray waves collided against the shoreline. Marble floors reflected soft golden lighting. Modern artwork lined quiet hallways. Everything felt elegant. Controlled. Safe. It was the kind of empire built by men who understood power. Silent bodyguards occupied strategic corners without appearing intrusive. Tailored suits concealed loyalty forged through unspoken rules. Nobody stared. Nobody questioned. Yet Evelyn understood immediately. This place belonged to a king. Adrian Moretti stood near the windows with Boston Harbor stretching endlessly behind him. 35. Tall. Composed. The devastating confidence surrounding him wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. The certainty of a man accustomed to commanding empires. His reputation had quietly shaped industries across Boston through legitimate investments, luxury developments, and influential partnerships. The newspapers celebrated him as a visionary businessman. The city whispered different stories. Whispers of syndicates. Whispers of loyalty. Whispers of dangerous wars fought beneath polished boardrooms. Adrian turned toward her. Dark eyes settled on Evelyn with unsettling precision. Not admiration. Assessment. You uncovered financial irregularities during your investigation, he said calmly. Evelyn stiffened. I investigate fraud. You investigated the wrong fraud. The room seemed to shrink around her. Adrian crossed toward the conference table where several documents rested untouched. You exposed shell corporations connected to rival operations, he continued. You didn't know what you found. But they know exactly who found it. Heart pounding, Evelyn stared at him. You're telling me criminals are after me? I'm telling you, Adrian replied evenly, that your life changed the moment your report reached the wrong hands. Fear settled heavily inside her chest. Every carefully rebuilt piece of her existence suddenly felt fragile. She wanted to leave. Wanted control. Wanted the illusion of safety she'd spent 8 months constructing. Adrian watched her silently before speaking again. I can protect you. Evelyn almost laughed. The irony tasted bitter. Protection offered by a man rumored to command his own empire of shadows. What do you want in return? The question lingered between them. Outside, rain streaked across endless glass. Inside, silence tightened. You'll become my fiancé. The whisper stole the air from her lungs. The words sounded impossible. Calculated. Dangerous. You'll remain under my protection, Adrian continued. You'll help identify traitors connected to the information you uncovered. And if I refuse? For the first time, something shifted behind his controlled expression. Not anger. Not frustration. Something frighteningly honest. "You can walk out that door," Adrian said quietly. "No one here will stop you." His gaze never left hers. "But you won't survive tonight." The truth in his voice terrified her more than threats ever could. Fear demanded escape. Logic demanded protection. Control demanded certainty. And somewhere beneath heart-pounding panic, Evelyn recognized something she hadn't felt in months. Safety. Not because Adrian Moretti was harmless, but because he looked at danger and promised to stand between it and her. The devil had offered her a shield. The price was belonging to his world. Belonging to him. Evelyn lowered her gaze toward trembling hands before lifting tear-bright eyes back toward Boston's most feared king. Then, barely above a whisper, she accepted the deal she had sworn never to make. Yes. People often assumed fear disappeared the moment danger moved farther away. They imagined safety as a locked door, a guarded gate, or the absence of chaos. Evelyn Brooks had once believed that too. But standing inside Adrian Moretti's oceanfront penthouse, surrounded by polished marble and breathtaking views of Boston Harbor, she discovered that fear wasn't something left behind. Fear traveled with you. It settled beneath your skin, hid inside your breath, and taught your heart to race its shadows long after the storm had passed. 3 days had passed since she accepted Adrian's impossible deal. 3 days of existing inside the kingdom of a man powerful enough to command empires and dangerous enough to silence entire rooms without raising his voice. Yet Adrian Moretti had never touched her. He never invaded her space. Never asked questions she wasn't prepared to answer. Never demanded affection in exchange for protection. That unsettled Evelyn more than fear itself. The penthouse functioned with quiet precision. Staff moved through the marble hallways with professional grace, their expressions neutral and respectful. Soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers during the evenings, blending with the distant rhythm of waves crashing against Boston Harbor below. Every detail reflected wealth and control. The monster's castle was elegant, disciplined, and strangely peaceful. It should have terrified her. Instead, it confused her. Evelyn remained emotionally guarded, maintaining routines that helped her survive. She counted exits in every room, memorized the location of elevators, avoided standing with her back toward open spaces. She woke before dawn to inspect unfamiliar surroundings and reassured herself that every lock remained secured. She noticed Adrian noticed everything. He never commented when she changed seats in conference rooms to face doorways. He simply adjusted. Without explanation, dining arrangements shifted. Meetings relocated. Security staff rotated. Hallway assignments changed. At first, Evelyn dismissed the changes as coincidence. Then one afternoon she entered the penthouse study and discovered detailed emergency instructions resting neatly beside her laptop. Panic room access codes. Emergency contacts. Alternate exits. Vehicle assignments. Security protocols designed specifically around her comfort. Heart pounding, Evelyn stared at the documents. The realization arrived slowly. Adrian had built safety around her fears. Without being asked. Without expecting gratitude. The king of Boston's hidden empire was rearranging his kingdom to accommodate nightmares he had never witnessed firsthand. One evening, unable to sleep, Evelyn wandered barefoot toward the midnight kitchen. City lights shimmered beyond towering windows while rain painted silver trails across endless glass. Adrian stood near the coffee machine, sleeves rolled above strong forearms, reviewing reports beneath soft lighting. The atmosphere remained quiet. Close. Comfortable. He glanced toward her. "You haven't slept." It wasn't a question. Evelyn stiffened. "I didn't realize you noticed." His gaze settled briefly on the untouched mug she carried. "You stop breathing properly when you're exhausted." Her breath caught. He returned attention to the reports as though discussing weather forecasts rather than exposing vulnerabilities she fought desperately to hide. Fear whispered that she should retreat. Control demanded distance. But another unfamiliar emotion settled beneath her ribs. Safety. Days turned into another week. Adrian remained consistently distant while somehow becoming impossible to ignore. When crowded events triggered anxiety, invitations quietly disappeared from schedules. When unfamiliar staff unsettled her, familiar faces appeared instead. When elevators made her uneasy, private access routes opened. Protection never arrived through dramatic declarations. It revealed itself through details. Loyalty hidden inside observation. Shields built from attentiveness. Evelyn found herself watching Adrian differently. Beneath the ruthless strategist existed a man who listened more than he spoke. A king carrying an empire while remembering how she preferred herbal tea before bed. Someone dangerous enough to command fear, yet patient enough not to demand trust before she was ready to offer it. Fear slowly loosened its grip. Not completely, but enough. Enough for conversations over midnight coffee. Enough for silences that no longer felt threatening. Enough for her heart to stop mistaking his presence for danger. She wasn't a victim. She was becoming powerful. Because healing wasn't forgetting fear. It was choosing who deserved access to the parts of yourself fear once controlled. Then everything changed. Late one evening, Evelyn crossed the marble hallway outside Adrian's private office. She hadn't intended to overhear anything. But his voice stopped her completely. Oh, controlled. Deadly calm. If they target the Empire, we'll handle it. Silence followed. Then Adrian spoke again. The whisper sent cold rushing through her veins. But understand this clearly. His pause felt endless. Anyone who harms her dies. Heart pounding beneath trembling breaths, Evelyn stood frozen outside the office door. Because for the first time since entering the monster's castle, she realized she wasn't merely under Adrian Moretti's protection. She had become someone the king himself refused to lose. People liked to believe that leaving was the hardest part. Leave the relationship. Leave the city. Leave the memories behind. Freedom would follow. Peace would arrive. The fear would finally loosen its grip around your heart. Evelyn Brooks had once clung to that belief with desperate hope. Now, standing inside Adrian Moretti's surveillance room while thunder rolled across the Boston skyline, she realized escaping an abuser never guaranteed freedom. Sometimes evil learned patience. Sometimes it waited. And sometimes, it returned stronger than before. Rain lashed against the penthouse windows with relentless determination while multiple security screens illuminated the darkened room. Maps, camera feeds, traffic reports, and encrypted communications transformed the sophisticated space into the war room of a king protecting his empire. Evelyn stood with folded arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the latest report displayed across one of the monitors. 3 anonymous messages. 2 unauthorized attempts to access protected records. 1 breach targeting the financial investigation that had accidentally placed her in the middle of syndicate politics. Heart pounding, she read the final line again. We know where she sleeps. Her breath caught. Fear tasted familiar. Close. Unwelcome. Adrian stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. His expression remained composed, but something colder existed beneath his control. The king was angry. They're escalating, one of his trusted lieutenants murmured quietly. Evelyn glanced toward Adrian. You know who this is? Silence stretched between them before Adrian finally turned toward her. Your former fiancé isn't acting alone. The room suddenly felt smaller. Thunder cracked overhead. No, Evelyn whispered instinctively. That's impossible. But deep down she already knew. 8 months earlier, she had escaped a man who disguised obsession as devotion. A man who had monitored her friendships, questioned her choices, and convinced her that isolation was love. He had never accepted losing control. Now, according to Adrian's intelligence network, he had aligned himself with rival syndicate interests eager to destabilize Moretti's empire. Fear and betrayal collided violently inside Evelyn's chest. The past she had buried wasn't simply resurfacing. It had evolved. He knows exactly how to frighten you, Adrian said quietly. The observation wasn't cruel. It was devastatingly accurate. Anonymous flowers arrived without notes. Songs she hadn't heard since her engagement played unexpectedly through hacked speakers. Messages appeared referencing private memories no stranger should recognize. Psychological warfare. Designed not to destroy her physically. Designed to unravel her emotionally. Heart pounding, Evelyn stopped sleeping. She double-checked locks inside the safest penthouse in Boston. She jumped whenever elevators chimed. She avoided mirrors because exhaustion transformed her reflection into someone she barely recognized. Control slipped through trembling fingers. One evening, Adrian discovered her standing alone near the midnight kitchen, staring blankly toward the ocean. You haven't eaten. I'm fine. The automatic response emerged instantly. Controlled. Practiced. False. You don't have to survive this alone. His voice softened around the edges. No demands. No commands. Only truth. Evelyn finally looked at him. Fear shimmered openly inside tear-bright eyes. What if they never stop? She whispered. What if this becomes my entire life? Adrian stepped closer. Not enough to invade her space. Just enough. Close enough for reassurance. Close enough for safety. Then they'll have to go through me first. The words settled deep beneath fractured places inside her heart. Protect. Chill. Loyalty. For the first time in years, Evelyn leaned into someone else's strength instead of carrying fear by herself. She wasn't weak. She wasn't surrendering. She was learning trust. And trust terrified her almost as much as danger itself. Outside, thunderstorms intensified. Inside the Empire, emergency protocols activated. Armored convoys rotated routes. Security assignments doubled. Private elevators required additional clearance. Whispers of betrayal moved through marble hallways. Someone within rival networks wanted Evelyn. Not because she was powerless, because she had become important. Then another crisis arrived. One of Adrian's most trusted lieutenants vanished. No explanations. No communications. No trace. The disappearance shattered the controlled rhythm of the Empire. For the first time since Evelyn met him, Adrian lost the calm composure that defined him. Not publicly. Not dramatically. But she noticed. The shortened breaths. The tightened jaw. The dangerous silence. The king had entered war. Hours later, a secure device resting on the conference table vibrated once. Then again. The room fell silent. Heart pounding, Evelyn watched Adrian pick up the encrypted message. His expression hardened as his gaze moved across the screen. Thunder echoed across Boston Harbor. Then Adrian slowly lifted his eyes toward her. The whisper that followed drained warmth from the room. They've made their demands. Fear tightened around Evelyn's lungs. Adrian handed her the device. 3 simple lines stared back at her beneath the cold glow of the screen. Trade the woman. Or count the bodies. And suddenly, Evelyn understood something terrifying. This wasn't merely a threat against Adrian's empire anymore. It was a war. And somehow, she had become the queen standing at the center of it. There were 2 kinds of kings. The first ruled through fear, convincing the world that power alone could build an empire strong enough to survive betrayal. The second ruled through loyalty, understanding that true strength wasn't measured by how many people obeyed them, but by how many they were willing to protect. Evelyn Brooks had spent most of her life believing Adrian Moretti belonged to the first category. A dangerous man. A powerful man. A king capable of moving entire cities with a whisper. Then he refused to trade her. The encrypted message remained displayed across the conference room screen long after everyone had read it. Trade the woman. Or count the bodies. The rival syndicate had made their demands with chilling confidence, assuming Adrian would choose logic over emotion. Empires were built on difficult decisions. Sacrifices. Strategy. They believed Evelyn Brooks was expendable. They underestimated Adrian Moretti. The silence inside the room was suffocating. Senior advisors exchanged cautious glances. Trusted lieutenants waited for instructions. Outside, rain battered the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor while thunder rolled like distant warnings. Adrian's expression never changed. They're asking for the impossible, one advisor finally whispered. No one breathed. Then Adrian spoke. We're not negotiating. Heart pounding, Evelyn looked toward him. The room seemed to shift. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't politics. This was choice. Adrian Moretti, king of an empire built through discipline and control, had just chosen her. A rescue operation quietly unfolded over the following days. Resources moved discreetly through trusted channels while Adrian worked tirelessly alongside the people who had remained loyal to him through years of whispered wars and silent betrayals. Evelyn expected frustration. Resentment. Instead, Adrian treated protecting his people as instinct. No hesitation. No conditions. Loyalty wasn't currency to him. It was sacred. Late one evening, unable to quiet the thoughts racing through her mind, Evelyn wandered into the penthouse library. Firelight danced across towering bookshelves while rain painted silver trails against the glass walls. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and old paper, creating warmth within an empire that often felt untouchable. Adrian sat near the fireplace. Alone. For once, he looked less like a king and more like a man carrying burdens no one else understood. You should sleep, he murmured without looking up. You should too. Silence settled comfortably between them. Close. Uncomplicated. Eventually Evelyn spoke. Why didn't you trade me? The question lingered beneath the crackling fire. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My mother spent years believing love required endurance, he said quietly. Evelyn's breath caught. It didn't matter how frightened she became. She stayed because she believed surviving made her strong. His voice remained controlled, but something deeper surfaced beneath every word. I promised myself I'd never become the reason someone felt trapped. The confession settled heavily between them. Heart-pounding, Evelyn listened. He spoke of childhood loneliness hidden beneath wealth. Of learning that power without compassion became cruelty. Of building an empire where loyalty mattered more than fear because betrayal had shaped every corner of his youth. Protection isn't ownership, Adrian said softly. People stay because they choose to. The king had finally lowered his armor. And beneath it existed grief. Humanity. Vulnerability. Days later, Evelyn accidentally discovered another truth. While reviewing charitable foundations connected to Moretti Enterprises, she noticed patterns. Anonymous donations funding shelters. Legal assistance programs. Housing initiatives protecting women escaping emotional abuse. No press releases. No public recognition. No attempts to gain admiration. Adrian had quietly spent years protecting strangers carrying wounds similar to hers. Tears burned behind Evelyn's eyes. The monster she'd feared had built safe places for women the world forgot. She wasn't special because Adrian protected her. Protecting people had always been part of who he was. Trust transformed slowly after that. Late-night conversations became routine. Shared coffee beneath firelit silence. Moments where words felt unnecessary because understanding existed within glances. Fear still lingered. But safety grew stronger. She wasn't a victim. She was becoming powerful enough to believe she deserved gentleness. Then one storm-filled evening, Adrian finally looked at her with an honesty powerful enough to steal her breath. "You became important before I realized it," he admitted quietly. The whisper shattered something fragile inside her chest. Heart pounding. Close. Dangerously close. The protector had fallen first. But just as Evelyn allowed herself to believe the impossible, that perhaps love and safety could coexist, she uncovered documents hidden inside Adrian's private office. And buried within those pages waited a devastating truth. One Adrian had never told her. One capable of destroying everything they had begun to build. Because the king protecting her had been connected to her life long before she ever walked into his empire. The cruelest betrayals never arrived from enemies standing outside the gates. They came from the people invited inside. The people trusted with secrets. The people whose loyalty had once felt unshakable. For Evelyn Brooks, the penthouse overlooking Boston Harbor had slowly transformed from a place of fear into something dangerously close to home. The silent marble corridors no longer felt cold. The ocean beyond the towering windows had become familiar. Even the distant hum of alarm systems resting beneath the empire's polished surface had started sounding less like warnings and more like reassurance. It had become the safest place she had ever known. Which was why discovering the truth felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. Snow drifted silently beyond the glass walls, blanketing Boston in deceptive beauty while Evelyn sat alone inside Adrian's private office. The documents spread across the mahogany desk refused to make sense. Financial transfers. Internal reports. Security authorizations. Names connected through invisible threads. Then one signature stopped her breath completely. Sebastian Vale. One of Adrian Moretti's oldest advisors. A man who had welcomed her into the empire with quiet professionalism. A man Adrian trusted. Heart pounding violently against her ribs, Evelyn followed the evidence with trembling fingers. Encrypted communications. Unauthorized access. Strategic leaks. The rival syndicate hadn't simply infiltrated the empire. Betrayal had been living inside it. Close. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Her chest tightened. Fear whispered familiar lies. You were foolish. You trusted again. You let your guard down. Worse still, buried beneath the reports rested another truth Adrian had concealed. Months before Evelyn accidentally exposed the rival operations, Adrian had already known her name. He had monitored the investigation. He had anticipated the danger moving toward her. The realization shattered something fragile inside her heart. Every conversation. Every comforting silence. Every protective gesture. Had any of it been real? Or had she merely become another strategic move on a king's chessboard? The snowstorm intensified outside. Inside the penthouse, silence settled heavily through empty corridors. Evelyn packed quickly. Control returned through action. Fold clothes. Gather documents. Protect your heart. Leave before fear trapped you again. She refused to become the woman who stayed simply because someone promised safety. She wasn't weak. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't a victim. The sound of measured footsteps stopped her entirely. Adrian stood in the doorway. Neither of them spoke immediately. The distance between them suddenly felt impossible. You were going to leave. It wasn't an accusation. Just truth. Evelyn's eyes burned. You knew who I was before I walked into this empire. I did. You watched my investigation. Yes. You made choices for me. Pain flashed briefly across Adrian's expression before disappearing beneath controlled composure. I made choices to keep you alive. The answer wasn't enough. Fear and betrayal had tangled themselves around her heart. You should have trusted me. His silence said everything. The king who inspired unwavering loyalty had withheld the one truth capable of destroying hers. Tears threatened, but Evelyn forced herself to breathe through them. You sound exactly like someone else who believed control and protection were the same thing. The words landed harder than anger ever could. Adrian lowered his gaze. When I realized what you meant to me, he whispered quietly, fear made me selfish. Snow continued falling outside. The empire held its breath. I won't cage you, Adrian said finally. His voice remained calm despite the devastation hidden beneath it. You can leave. Evelyn blinked. What? You choose. Heart pounding, she stared at him. The most powerful man in Boston. The king capable of commanding empires. The protector who had crossed invisible lines to keep her safe. He stepped aside from the doorway. No bodyguards blocked the exits. No alarm systems activated. No conditions followed. If loving you means becoming the thing you're escaping, Adrian said softly, then I lose you either way. The whisper fractured every defensive wall Evelyn had rebuilt. He wasn't choosing possession. He was choosing freedom. Choosing her agency. Choosing love over control. Fear battled fiercely against attachment. Logic reminded her betrayal still existed. Yet another part of her remembered midnight conversations beside firelit libraries. Emergency protocols built around her comfort. Anonymous shelters protecting women like her. The man who had fallen first. Love fought desperately against fear. Evelyn stood frozen between two futures. Live. Stay. Run. Trust. Before she could decide, every light inside the penthouse flickered once. Then twice. The silence shattered beneath the sharp sound of emergency alarms echoing through marble hallways. Snow continued falling outside while red security alerts illuminated empty corridors. Adrian's expression transformed instantly. The king had returned. Heart pounding beneath fragile breaths, Evelyn turned toward the nearest surveillance screen. A secure message flashed across the system. The rival syndicate hadn't waited for her choice. They had already made theirs. And suddenly, the war standing at the empire's gates had come inside. There came a moment in every war when survival stopped being enough. A moment when fear lost its authority. A moment when the woman who had spent years running finally turned around and decided she was done surrendering pieces of herself to people who thrived on control. For Evelyn Brooks, that moment arrived beneath the cold red glow of emergency alarms echoing through Adrian Moretti's empire. Snow continued falling outside Boston Harbor, transforming the city into something deceptively beautiful while chaos whispered through encrypted calls and hurried footsteps. The penthouse war room pulsed with tension. Surveillance screens illuminated worried faces. Advisors exchanged theories. Loyal men questioned loyalties they had once considered unbreakable. The empire was under attack. But Evelyn noticed something unexpected. She wasn't shaking. Her breath remained steady. Her heart still pounded, but fear no longer owned it. Because somewhere between betrayal and belonging, she had stopped seeing herself as a woman waiting to be rescued. She was not a victim. She became powerful. I know how they operate. The words silenced the room. Adrian looked toward her from across the tactical table, concern and disbelief colliding inside his dark gaze. Evelyn. No, she interrupted softly. I've spent my entire career tracing lies disguised as truth, following money, understanding manipulation. Her voice strengthened. They don't want to destroy your empire. She pointed toward the screens displaying financial reports. They want to control the narrative. Frame your legitimate businesses. Trigger federal investigations. Create fear powerful enough to make people betray each other. Silence followed. Then realization settled heavily across the room. The queen had entered the game. Days blurred into strategy sessions hidden beneath sleepless nights. Evelyn moved through the war room with focused precision, uncovering financial conspiracies buried beneath shell corporations and manipulated transactions. Patterns emerged. Sebastian's betrayal connected to offshore accounts. Rival syndicate partnerships disguised as philanthropic ventures. Federal inquiries strategically redirected toward Moretti enterprises. Every answer revealed another layer. Every layer brought them closer to the truth. Adrian watched quietly as the emotionally guarded woman he had protected transformed before his eyes. Fear still existed, but courage had finally become stronger. Meanwhile, invitations arrived for Boston's most prestigious charity gala. A gathering of politicians, investors, federal representatives, the city's elite. The perfect stage for enemies hiding behind polished smiles. Dressed in midnight blue silk, Evelyn entered the luxury ballroom beside Adrian. Crystal chandeliers reflected across marble floors while orchestras whispered through the elegant crowd. Months ago, environments like this had reduced her to hypervigilance and escape routes. Now she noticed different things. Hidden alliances, calculated glances, conversations interrupted too quickly. The power dynamics beneath wealth. She wasn't merely surviving the room. She was commanding her place within it. The former fiancé who had once mistaken control for love found herself standing beside a king who had taught her that protection didn't require possession. Together, they exposed hidden financial trails before federal investigators. Presented evidence. Protected innocent employees connected to the empire. Forced traitors into the light without sacrificing loyalty to those who deserved saving. The war shifted. Not because Adrian stood alone. Because Evelyn stood beside him. After the gala, Boston slept beneath quiet snowfall while the penthouse remained awake. Evelyn stood near the windows overlooking the harbor, reflecting on the woman she used to be. The woman who checked locks obsessively. Who believed vulnerability guaranteed destruction. Who thought fear would always define her future. Soft footsteps approached. Close. Familiar. Adrian stopped beside her. "You saved us," he said quietly. Evelyn shook her head. "We saved each other." The whisper settled between them. Safe. Honest. Real. Then without warning, Adrian stepped back. Heart pounding, Evelyn turned toward him. The king of Boston's empire lowered himself onto one knee. Not beneath chandeliers. Not before advisors. Not as a performance. As a man. The room seemed to stop breathing. "I spent my entire life believing love weakened people," Adrian admitted softly. "I built walls. Controlled outcomes. Protected everyone except myself." His gaze never left hers. "Then you walked into my empire and reminded me what loyalty actually looks like." Emotion tightened Evelyn's throat. "You don't belong to me," Adrian whispered. "But if you choose to stay." He paused. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving you chose correctly." Tears blurred her vision. Heart pounding. Breath trembling. The survivor had become a queen. And the king had offered his heart without demanding ownership in return. Evelyn opened her mouth to answer. Then the silence shattered. The distant sound echoed through the penthouse. Sure. Unexpected. Glass vibrated. Alarms reignited. Adrian rose instantly, instinct replacing tenderness as his attention shifted toward the harbor below. Fear returned like an unwelcome ghost. Because the war wasn't finished. And somewhere within the empire's fragile moment of peace, gunshots interrupted everything. Some love stories begin with destiny. Others begin with stolen glances and perfect timing. Evelyn Brooks and Adrian Moretti began with fear. A desperate deal. A transaction built on survival. A woman who no longer trusted love and a king who no longer believed he deserved it. Neither of them realized they had been building a home inside each other's broken places. The emergency alarms echoed throughout the penthouse while Boston Harbor disappeared beneath the final darkness before dawn. Advisors rushed through marble corridors. Surveillance screens flickered between alerts and updates. The empire stood balanced between loyalty and betrayal, waiting for one final confrontation to determine what remained standing when the dust settled. But something inside Evelyn had changed. Weeks earlier, fear would have controlled her breathing. Heart pounding would have meant surrender. Now, heart pounding simply reminded her that courage existed alongside fear. She wasn't a victim. She became powerful. Standing beside Adrian inside the surveillance room, Evelyn analyzed the final reports flowing across the monitors. The rival syndicate's financial structure had collapsed beneath the evidence she uncovered. Federal investigators had redirected attention toward those truly responsible. Sebastian's betrayal had been exposed. The empire had survived. Not through intimidation. Through truth. Adrian stood close enough that she could feel the steady rhythm of his breath. The king looked exhausted. Relieved. Human. "You should rest," he murmured. Evelyn looked toward him. "When this started, I thought surviving meant disappearing." The whisper softened between them. "Now I think surviving means choosing who deserves access to your heart." Adrian's gaze faltered. Fear still lived inside both of them. Fear of loss. fear of betrayal. Fear that love demanded sacrifice instead of safety. Then the final confrontation arrived. Not through violence, not through revenge, but through choice. Evelyn sat across from the man who had once convinced her that control was devotion. The man who had spent years reshaping her understanding of love into obedience. Her former fiancé no longer looked powerful. He looked small, desperate, still chasing ownership disguised as affection. "You could have had everything," he whispered. Evelyn held his gaze steadily. "No." Silence settled between them. "I already have everything." For the first time, she understood that healing wasn't proving someone wrong. It was refusing to carry their version of you any longer. She chose peace over punishment, healing over revenge, freedom over fear. And when she walked away from him, she left behind the final version of herself that still believed survival required shrinking. The war ended quietly after that. Boston woke beneath pale winter sunlight while newspapers celebrated the unraveling of corruption hidden behind corporate respectability. The Moretti Empire remained standing, changed, stronger. Not because a king ruled through fear, but because loyalty had survived betrayal. Days later, Adrian collapsed from exhaustion inside the hospital corridor after weeks of carrying responsibilities heavier than anyone realized. The scare lasted only hours. Yet watching him lying beneath sterile white lighting shattered something fragile inside Evelyn. The fear wasn't losing safety. It was losing him. Hospital recovery introduced a different kind of intimacy. Quiet conversations. Shared coffee. Blankets draped across shoulders. The realization that love wasn't grand declarations. It was showing up. Again. And again. And again. Weeks passed. Winter softened into spring. The penthouse kitchen became their favorite sanctuary. Barefoot mornings. Midnight tea. Soft jazz drifting through open spaces. The empire no longer felt like Adrian's castle. It felt like theirs. One evening, while preparing dinner beneath golden sunset reflections, Evelyn paused. Heart pounding. Breath trembling. Then she crossed the kitchen. Adrian looked up from the counter. Fear still existed. But for the first time in her life, love felt safe. "I never said yes," she whispered. Confusion crossed his face. Evelyn smiled through tears. "You asked me to stay." She stepped closer. Close enough to hear his breathing. Close enough to feel home. "I'm saying yes now." Adrian's eyes closed briefly. The king who once believed power meant control finally allowed himself vulnerability. The fake engagement became real. Wedding preparations followed quietly. No elaborate headlines. No empire-building spectacle. Only loyalty. Only love. Only two emotionally scarred people choosing each other every single day. Sunrise painted Boston Harbor gold on the morning they exchanged vows. No fear. No bargaining. No conditions. Just promises whispered between two people who understood exactly how precious safety could be. Months later, Evelyn stood once again near the penthouse windows where rain had once reflected her loneliness. Only this time Adrian stood behind her. Warm. Steady. Safe. She guided his hand gently against her stomach. The movement beneath his palm stole his breath completely. Heart pounding, Adrian stared at her. Then down again. Emotion shattered every remaining piece of armor surrounding the king of Boston's empire. Tears gathered silently inside eyes that had witnessed betrayal, war, and loss. Evelyn rested her forehead against his. "You taught me love wasn't ownership," she whispered. "And you taught me fear doesn't get the final word." The child moved again. Close. Certain. Real. Outside, Boston Harbor welcomed another sunrise. Inside, the king who once ruled through control finally understood the greatest truth of his life. His greatest power had never been fear. Never the empire. Never the loyalty of powerful men. Was love. And the woman who entered his life through a desperate deal had given him something no kingdom ever could. A home.